the audience to learn from some of our UN volunteer heroes. These heroes or these UN volunteers have been very active and responding during the COVID-19. Ernest, Cynthia, and Tina will chat with us today about their challenges and opportunities in this time of crisis and how their assignments are going. So sit back, relax, and let's chat. Ernest, introduce yourself. Tell us where you're coming from and who you are.
Everybody. My name is Ernest Gibson, and I'm a United Nations volunteer based in Suva, Fiji. I work for an office called the United Nations Resident Coordinator's Office, which is basically a secretariat for UN agencies based in the country. And we're a unique RCO because we cover 10 countries in the Pacific region. My assignment is focused specifically on the UN 75 campaign, which, as most of you know, surrounds the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And I'm absolutely pleased to be here. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ernest, for being here in your time zone, which is a little bit difficult compared to others at the moment, but thanks, and we're really excited to have you online. Tina, to you, introduce yourself to those online.
Hi everyone, I'm Tina. I'm from South Korea, serving as a UN volunteer at IOM in Kyrgyzstan. In Kyrgyzstan, I'm a migration and employment specialist. I mostly do research and project development. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Good to see you online, and welcome to the chat. And Cynthia, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Nyongesa. I am a 25-year-old United Nations volunteer at UNICEF Kenya. I work with children and young people through communication and advocacy and through Generation Unlimited as well.
Thanks, Cynthia. Nice to see you also online. So here we have they introduced themselves, our three heroes, our three UN volunteers, and let's get started. Let's talk a bit to each one of you and exchange about your assignments during the COVID pandemic. Ernest, you mentioned to me earlier when we were discussing and getting to know each other online about a recent mission you were involved in. Can you paint a picture for our viewers on this trip and what it was about and how you got places and what you actually were doing?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I work specifically on the UN 75 campaign, which focuses around generating conversation in communities, but specifically targeting the most vulnerable groups across the globe. So last month, I was with a team of 70 people that took a boat trip to 5 of the most remote islands in Fiji. And these are islands that very often don't get very many services. And the mission consisted of government ministries and departments, civil society organizations, private sector organizations, media partners, as well as UN agencies. And I think the idea behind this whole mission was to try and find ways of ensuring we were bringing all stakeholders together, because we recognize that service delivery is not something that can be done as individuals or as individual agencies even. It needs to be done in an integrated way, because problems that people face are problems that are complex and multifaceted and have so many different moving parts. And the only way that you can effectively help people is if we all do it together. And I think it lines up really nicely with the theme for International Volunteer Day, because the only way that we're ever going to be able to solve the issues that we face, which are difficult and complex, is if we do it in a way that is integrated and together. So we took with us a team of surgeons, as well as humanitarian workers. We took dialogue facilitators. We took government ministries who are responsible for social services. And all in all, I think we visited more than 18 villages. We delivered cash assistance post-cyclone. We had a medical team of 5 people that did, in 5 days, 45 surgeries across these 18 villages. So it was a pretty unreal experience almost.
Amazing. So how you mentioned that you were a group of people and you were moving together, and how does that work, and how many, maybe you mentioned it, but I just wanted to emphasize it again. You mentioned the number of villages, but were there different islands that you were going to, or how was that actually?
Yeah, so there are 5 islands in total that we visited. So we all slept on the boat and we traveled overnight. And then during the day, we kind of disembarked at the different islands. We visited as many villages as we could before sunset. And we had to get back onto the boat because that was the only time that made sense to travel. So we could do this in the most efficient way possible. So just imagine 70 people, government ministers, permanent secretaries, heads of agency, as well as just UN volunteers like myself, all in one space in a very small, dingy looking boat, traveling across some pretty rocky seas. It's fun, but it's also a little bit scary.
Wow. How long was the mission in total? How many days?
So the mission in total was 7 days.
7 days. Great. Thank you, Ernest. You've definitely painted a picture for us. Let's go to Tina. Tina, tell us about starting your assignment during the pandemic and what emergency projects that your team, the team and yourself are working on at the moment.
So I joined IOM, International Organization for Migration, in July, and it was in the middle of the pandemic here in Kyrgyzstan. So I joined the team online, which was a bit difficult. I've never seen any of my colleagues. I only talked to them online. So getting on board was a little difficult, but they were all really, really helpful in having me, very, very helpful in allowing me to join and giving me projects and giving me guides. So that's been very interesting process of joining the team. And our team has been helping vulnerable migrants during the COVID-19, especially vulnerable labor migrants, because Kyrgyzstan sends a lot of labor migrants to neighboring countries, including Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkey, South Korea, and Japan. There are about 700,000 Kyrgyz labor migrants abroad. And during the COVID times, of course, a lot of them became vulnerable. So our team helped Kyrgyz migrants who are stranded at the border, especially at the airports, by giving them food and shelter. And we also helped migrants stuck in Kyrgyzstan, migrants from Moldova and Tajikistan and Russia, to help them to register properly so they can stay in Kyrgyzstan legally. And also help them with other administrative tasks. We also worked with government in terms of capacity building, and we trained border personnel at the border control checkpoints. So we did a lot of integrated border management and labor migrants, like helping vulnerable migrants. So it's been a really hectic but exciting few months. And I acted as a researcher and coordinator. I kind of worked behind the scene. I wasn't at the field, but I'm happy to have served the team to help my colleagues, especially my national colleagues, so that they can do their work better, get the emergency projects rolling faster. So I'm glad that I've contributed to the team this way.
Wow, Tina, so you really hit the road running, I would say. Even though you were in a home office, you weren't able to run outside. Well, I hope you do. You have some time to get outside, but you really have been thrown into your assignment in the middle of a very turbulent time. And it sounds quite interesting. I just want to put you on the spot about the words you used, the terminology capacity building. You mentioned that there was capacity building in the project. And for us in the United Nations, we tend to use words like that might be a bit jargonesque. What concretely in that project were this capacity building? I assume it's, training people. Give us an example of something specific of that capacity building.
For example, raising awareness, providing trainings. Like I said, the example was providing training for the personnel at the border checkpoint, so that they are more aware of health measures at the checkpoint, so that they can check everyone who comes in, and they can do so according to international regulations. Fantastic,
thanks. Cynthia, on to you in Kenya. So this beautiful morning, I hope. Describe the situation during the pandemic where you are and how you and your fellow volunteers have adapted?
Well, so for us here in Kenya, in the beginning, it was such a big challenge, but I'm very glad that UNICEF Kenya had been preparing for an emergency kind of work situation for the last 2 years. So by the time the pandemic was hitting the country, we were prepared to work from home. So unlike Ernest, I have not been able to go to the field since March. The last time I went to the field was in February. So I really miss going to the field. However, in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of young people in fear, not knowing what to do. Many of them have been left out of school, out of employment, and many of them also did not have enough information when it came to COVID-19. So at UNICEF Kenya, I was leading a project on raising awareness about behavior change and COVID-19. One of the most significant things I was able to do was lead the No Pata Pata dance. In Africa, pata pata means touch, touch. So we were able to tell young people, no pata pata, no touching, stay at home and stay safe. And I was leading a dance. This was incredible because I am not a dancer, to be honest, but I had to learn so that I could engage other young people. And the most exciting bit of it was seeing how they were willing to pass on information about COVID-19. So I saw them dancing and posting videos here and there, and it was a very big collaboration together with one of our Goodwill ambassador, Angelique Kidjo. One of the other things we were able to do was enabling young people and children to raise their voices in the middle of COVID-19. Because in the midst of all this confusion, what happens is that sometimes the voices of children and young people are lost. So during the pandemic, I led the UNICEF Reimagine competition, and it was basically asking young people to reimagine their world post-COVID-19. So we asked them to write an essay, we asked them to send in photos, images, and artwork, just showing us what they think and what they hope for. And the most exciting thing that I saw was how young people were willing to share their perspectives, how they were willing to talk about the world they see. And many of them talked a lot about going back to school and enabling them to access education through technology, and especially catering for children with disabilities. And some of them were also able to be engaged with the media, and on World Children's Day, they were able to share their perspectives. So seeing young people who are engaged constantly has been a very important thing working at UNICEF.
Thank you, Cynthia. That's really telling. I mean, I think that we all know that, of course, this is a pandemic and a health crisis, but also, you know, the access to education and children's health, and also their mental health and their social development has really been threatened, and that's really so important. I had threatened the panel here, or our speakers, to actually do the dance, but I'm not going to go that far. But I do hope that for those of you that are viewing, if you have had creative campaigns or ideas during the pandemic, like Cynthia mentioned with her dance and other outreach, please write them in the chat. We'd also like to hear from you. That is always interesting to see. And also please write, if you haven't done so, where you're viewing from, because it's always nice to see where viewers are from. So now back to Ernest. Explain, you know, Cynthia mentioned that she hasn't been able to be in the field. You have, because you mentioned your amazing whirlwind mission with all kinds of activities going on. Explain the situation in Fiji for us and the way the pandemic has affected your region, maybe in a different way than some of us, for example, me sitting here in Europe. I think Ernest just dropped. Ah, he's back. Ernest, you need to unmute. Okay, so we will wait till Ernest gets back online. Ah, there he is. Great. Okay.
Hi.
Sorry,
Hi.
just a little bit of a technical difficulty.
No problem, thanks. Okay.
No, I think, yeah, Cynthia's had obviously a very different experience to that of mine. And I really do have to say, Cynthia, I feel for you, because I don't know if I'd be able to survive not being able to go into the field as often as I've been fortunate to. But I think it's really important to recognize that the situation that we've had here in the Pacific, although we've had a very limited health crisis, has been very different to that being faced in other parts of the world. And I really enjoyed the point that you made, Cynthia, around ensuring that we were prepared far in advance. And I think that that's something that we weren't necessarily prior to COVID here in this region, because the socioeconomic crisis that we've been faced with is one that has never been seen before. And I think the scariest part about it is that we don't know how long it's going to last for. And so whilst there is relatively free movement around, people have the ability to go and see their families, there isn't this constant fear of the disease turning into a massive community outbreak. The real fear is that there are so many people, because of the ways in which our economies have been designed, who have lost their jobs and have now had to turn to entrepreneurship. I think the flip side, and I know I sound like a little bit of a doom and gloomer here, but the flip side has been the way in which we see this enormous shift towards previous practices of ensuring that communities were built around this idea of community. So in Fiji, we have a word called solidarity. And I don't expect anybody else on this call to be able to pronounce that word. I've lived here my whole life and I struggle. But it's essentially this idea of ensuring that the needs of the community are constantly being met by the community. So when somebody needs a specific piece of help, the community is there to fill in. And I think that's the beauty of that the pandemic has really brought about here in the country. We've seen workers who have lost their jobs and gone from earning upwards of $1,000 a week to now earning less than $10 a week. But we've also seen in that same space, family members stepping in to ensure that their daily needs are being met, that individuals have the ability to feed their children, that students can still continue to go to school. And that's been the beauty of the resilience of the Pacific people. I think we've always seen this post-cyclones. We see the way in which Pacific Islanders come together and ensuring that we can rebuild after, for example, the tsunami in Samoa, or when we talk about Cyclone Winston that happened here in Fiji a few years ago. We've always seen this level of building back, but this crisis has been different than the things that we are, I mean, for want of a better way of saying it, used to. And personally, the crisis is horrible, but it's also something that I've seen the best of Pacific Island people. And it means that there is this enormous sense of hope that we have, that we will get through this. But as I said earlier, only if we continue to work together through that spirit of solidarity.
Thanks, Ernest. And Ernest, speaking from the heart about the region, has also even put in there a bit about actually the theme for this year for International Volunteer Day. Together we can, through volunteering. And I don't say that just to pitch the campaign, but I think that when you hear something like that from Ernest and about resilience of the communities by bringing people together, you know, there is a silver lining to sometimes to be forced in a way to step back, not to diminish, you know, the loss, of course, and the tragedy health-wise that's happening and economically, but that is so true. And yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I think going to Tina, that actually sort of moves in that direction, because I wanted to ask Tina now to give us some insights on what you see around you. I mean, especially as an international volunteer, of how civil society and community volunteers are responding to the pandemic.
First, I also wanted to say to Cynthia that I also suffer from not being able to go to the field and enjoy this beautiful country. I've been stuck in my apartment for a really long time. So I'm really looking forward to the post-pandemic time where I can really enjoy and go out and see the mountains. And as Ernest said, Kyrgyzstan as well has been suffering really socially and economically because of the COVID-19. Because of the lockdown, a lot of small businesses are suffering, and because of course, health measures, people cannot gather, and it has been quite a crisis in almost every aspect of this community. And as an international volunteer, I see my role, and also as a researcher, I see kind of my role as a behind the scene supporting actor. And I absolutely watched in awe how the community volunteers have come together to really serve the community during these really difficult times. For example, as soon as the pandemic started, volunteers gathered to deliver medical equipment and food to medical workers. They did fundraising to help rural hospitals and local businesses. They helped cater to medical staff and the vulnerable members of the community. Also, there was a large political protest in early October here in the midst of the pandemic. And it turned violent a bit. And at the time, the community came together here in Bishkek, and they guarded people and the building and property safety, even at night when it was quite cold in the autumn. So I absolutely admire the work of the community volunteers in Kyrgyzstan, and it was especially as an international volunteer, I really absolutely was inspired by their actions.
Thanks so much. That is really, that shows that the universality of what we're talking about, of people coming together. Cynthia, you're involved a lot in youth work. Give us an insight into what that means, working with youth during the pandemic, and your experiences.
Well, so for me, working in the community has been very interesting, and I'm so glad Tina has mentioned the aspect of civil society, because it is now during the COVID-19 pandemic that I have seen young people in Kenya coming together through civil society. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had a call from the government to engage as young people. And let me just give an example of a young woman in my community. She's called Pauline Juma. And working as a young person who amplifies this story, I met Pauline, and she is a very strong woman who talks about gender-based violence. Now, during the pandemic, the rates of gender-based violence increased, and especially within the homes. She is collaborating with other young people in the community. She came up with a shelter house, and right now she's rescuing young women who are going through gender-based violence. She's been very active in reporting these cases to the police station, and I see her even going to court to follow up on these proceedings. Of course, this is not easy, because sometimes, there are challenges where somebody is going through gender-based violence and they're not able to talk about it, or by the time they talk about it, probably they already took a shower, so there is no evidence. And she has been working with young women in the community and telling them gender-based violence is real. Do not be afraid of reporting. So that's one aspect. The other aspect we're facing as young people is the importance of nutrition. Because right now, doctors are telling us you need to stay healthy, you need to exercise. But right now, how are young people going to do that if they have no money? But I'm so glad there's a young person called Elizabeth Okulo right here in Kenya. And she came up with a greenhouse project, and she's using hydroponic farming to grow her vegetables, to grow her crops. While she is earning money, she's also able to work in the community and improve the nutrition of the society. Lastly, I already mentioned that a lot of young people are out of school. Not many of them can access education. So there's a group known as Jalia Club. They were finalists of the Generation Unlimited Challenge in 2018. And what they've been doing is they've gathered young women and they've been giving them digital skills. Because remember, the future of work is digital. Not even the future, even right now, work is all digital. So how do we enable young people to transition smoothly into the workplace? And they've taken this season as an opportunity to train young people on gaining digital skills, and hence they will be okay in the future. 75% of people in Kenya are young people. So the only way to make sure that we have a secure future for our children then is to engage us. And I'm so glad that the young people in our community are taking up that role.
Wow, Cynthia, that's a lot of good examples of people, young people really engaging and being creative and innovative. For those of you that are listening in, if you also have other ideas or things that you'd like to share on innovation, young people, like Cynthia has mentioned, Cynthia's been working and volunteering for quite some time in that area, but also people of all ages. I mean, we noticed that there's people that can really do their part no matter really what the age is. It's just a mindset of what you want to give to your community and your surroundings. There's also, and I will ask one more question to each of the speakers, but in the meantime, if you have questions that you would like to ask, then please write them in the chat so that we can collect them. So before I get to my last question, I just want to really emphasize that, first of all, I'm not thanking you UN volunteers yet who are speaking with us today because we're not at the end, but I want to acknowledge and recognize that not only are you outstanding examples of UN volunteers and representing our over 9,000 volunteers, UN volunteers at the moment in the field, but you really, one of the reasons, and particularly the reason we've asked you to speak to everyone today on the eve of International Volunteer Day is because you really are heroes and you exemplify that extra mile that you've taken during the pandemic to reach out to people and to volunteer your inspiration, your energy, your skills, and your ideas. So I just want to thank you, but we're not leaving yet. So, so my last round is that I'd like to start with Ernest, and then Cynthia and Tina, and ask you what your 3 tips would be for those who are listening in, for other UN volunteers during this unusual and stressful time. What are your tips for being the volunteer that they want to be, but also staying healthy and safe? So over to you.
Just 3.
Just, I'm counting.
I think there are so many things that I've learned even just over the last eight months of this assignment that I would like to share, but obviously I only have time to give 3. So the first one would be to take care of yourself and ensure that you are in a place that's mentally safe, physically safe, because at the end of the day, we're only able to give as much as we have. You can only give from a full cup. And so as much as you want to help, you also need to be ensuring that you are keeping yourself safe, because that puts you in a position to be able to help others. And there are times where, you can't physically give any more than you're already giving, and that's okay. It's okay to be able to say, I'm sorry, I don't think I have the time or the energy space to be able to give to this particular thing. And that's fine. So the first one is to ensure that you're always taking care of yourself. And the second one is to ensure that you pick things that you really are passionate about. Because once you find a passion for something, then it's very difficult for you to lose sight of that goal. And I think it really made me think about it when Tina was saying, I just work in the background, I'm just providing some research help. I think we're all parts of a puzzle, although like the way to think about it is we're all parts of a car. And if you remove one of those wheels, the car's gonna start to topple over. Not everybody can do everything. Everybody has a role to play and need to find that role. And you do that by finding the things that you love and are passionate about. And the last one is, we are social beings by nature. So always have a close-knit group of friends and family around you. Even if it's not physically possible for you to have them in your purview, keep them online. I think we're so unbelievably blessed that this pandemic is taking place in a time where we have the ability to have a call like this, where there are people based all over the world, where I still have the opportunity to call my family that aren't based here in Suva. And so we rely on other people and our strength comes in our numbers. So we always need to be in contact with each other, checking in on each other. Yeah, so stay healthy, find the things that you're passionate about, and keep a close-knit group of people around you.
The next tips.
Okay, thank you so much, Ernest, for all those tips. I really think what you said is very important. So as a young person who amplifies the stories of young change makers through CynthiaUntamed.com, one of the things that I've realized is so important is being innovative, and especially being innovative when you're raising funds. For a long time, young people have been asking for funds from organizations, from governments, but right now during COVID, sometimes you'll find that the funds are limited. But I've seen them going online. We have a mobile money transfer platform called M-Pesa, one of the most innovative things here in East Africa. And I have seen young people creating a pay bill and asking people to contribute. And in as much as people will contribute just 50 shillings, that's about 50 cents. People will contribute very little. But when you have so many people contributing, you'll realize that you have a lot of money. So think of innovative ways in which you can do things and still reach out to your communities. The other thing I have seen has been so important is collaborating with other people. Don't work alone. Like Ernest said, we are all social beings. Don't work alone. When you work alone, you'll realize that you won't be able to reach many people. But when you join hands with other people, you'll realize that you'll reach more people. And never say that I don't have anything to contribute. You can give something. When I was starting my digital platform, Cynthia and Team, I didn't have money, but I knew my resource was writing and speaking and communicating. And that's exactly what I did online. And that's how I was able to join the United Nations volunteers. Lastly, it's very important for you to document your work. A lot of young people do great things in the community, but they forget to document. And especially right now in times of COVID, remember, as you're serving your community, there's also something you are gaining as an individual. And this is from personal experience. When you apply for a scholarship, they will ask you for your leadership potential. They'll ask you for a time you are able to network. They'll ask you for your future plans. If you are not able to document somewhere and just take a few notes and say, today I reached 10 people, today I reached 20 people, or today this was my success journey, you won't be able to remember. So it's so important for you to document your work. Never forget that.
Thank you. Tina.
I guess Cynthia and Ernest really said almost everything I wanted to say. I'll just put them in my words. The first one is to, of course, stay healthy, both mentally and physically. As Ernest said, you can only give as much as you have. And also it really affects other people around you. If you give out good energy, when you're healthy, when you can take care of yourself, it also inspires others to do the same, and also lending an ear to others, and you can also lend ear to others when you're healthy as well. The second is to, the second is to believe in your action and follow your heart. As I said, before I became a UN volunteer, I mostly stayed in the library behind my books. I was a researcher. I kind of limited myself in reaching out to the wider world and reaching out and like be a part of a wider community. But then what I learned by being a UN volunteer is that I am part of a big team. I don't have to do everything, as Ernest said, and my skills are valuable. And your skills are valuable as well in whatever area of education or experience that you have. So be confident in yourself and go out to the world and contribute as much as you want. And the third part is to be compassionate, because by listening to others, people's happiness and pain and sadness and anger, you get inspired. You can come up with innovative solutions. You can provide sympathetic answers. So being compassionate really makes you a good part of makes you a really important part of the community. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
Thank you so much. These are wonderful tips. I look forward to actually listening to the recording so I can write them down. I think they're not only inspirational, but Yeah, they're sort of universal, you know, for volunteering, for volunteers, but also for life in general. So thank you very much for that. We do have some questions. We are, of course, now a bit short of time, but I think that it's been so rich and so wonderful that it's just to mention that if your question is in the comment box and it hasn't been answered, or I don't speak to it now, it will be after the chat. So to Tina, just if you could answer quite short, because we are at the end of our time, what challenges did you face during your volunteering post? That is a very general question, but maybe, you know, one or two challenges.
The most realistic challenge is moving to another country, trying to adapt to a new culture, new community, trying to learn the language and everything. So being in a new environment is a challenge, but also it's a great opportunity for you to grow. So it has been a great opportunity for me.
Thanks. And to Ernest, we have a question here. Very practical question. How do you cope with government bureaucracy when you go to remote places?
I think the idea is that you should always focus on what the reason behind your trip is. And I know it can be frustrating as anything to deal with governments and the red tape that sometimes is involved with them. But the idea is always finding the way in which you can connect on a particular issue. In this particular instance, I was really lucky because we recognize that these communities are at the top of our agenda and ensuring that their lives can be improved through us working together. And we are also, I think it's really important just to say that you have to always be extremely candid and honest with your responses to even people like governments. If you feel like the service that they're providing is not sufficient, and you feel that there is a way in which you could be propositional and solutions oriented in a response, tell them. They may not listen to you, but the mere fact that you're kind of pointing it out means that you are starting the conversation about change.
Thanks so much. And Cynthia, here's a good one. What skills would you advise aspiring volunteers to develop in order to be successful?
Number one, communication skills. You have to be a very good communicator. Then the ability to mobilize people. You'll realize whether you volunteer at the UN or outside of the UN, you'll be required to mobilize people. So that's very important. But the last one, I don't know whether this is a skill, but it's very important. You need to be very confident in who you are. When I joined UNICEF, I was the youngest person at the office, and I had instances of imposter syndrome. But you have to believe in yourself and say that you are there for a reason and you are selected because you are competent.
Nice, thank you very much. So this does conclude, unfortunately our time is up, but I want to thank Ernest, Tina, and Cynthia for sharing your experiences and your tips and your energy, and for making this this talk really rich. And to me, this is something really special, that during the digital time, to be able to connect with UN volunteers like yourselves and really have these conversations. So I want to thank you very much, and also congratulate you on all the efforts and volunteering you've done, and wish you and all of the volunteers around you a very happy International Volunteer Day tomorrow. And also, I don't know if you've all prepared. I don't know if anyone has remembered. Aha! So to end our chat, we wanted to remind people that in most places in the world, we really need to keep our mask on, be safe and healthy, and remember the campaign around Heart Your Mask, and we've done a good job. Your masks look great. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. Goodbye.